So in a way, I suppose I had a bit of a strange background, that I genuinely started as a commercial person, then moved into key account management within the telecoms industry, and then moved into HR almost by chance, partly as part of my career development as well. And so worked for a lot of big name companies, for British Telecom, the Redland Group and so on, as head of HR director and so on. And then about 5-6 years ago was asked to manage a centralised HR function that then, for Remploy, which then really turned into more of a sort of shared service operation. So we were looking at how to provide advice to 80 plus sites, 8,000 employees around the country. So it was very much thinking about setting up an advice line, employee relations line, then the admin support that went with that. It then expanded into managing the payroll operations, recruitment, training and development. So it really became a full-blown HR shared service. So it was almost a bit by accident, and it sort of evolved. And as I was doing it, I was learning more about the operational side and the complexities, learning more about the technology that was required and so on. And then really from there, was headhunted to go and work for a number of other organisations doing a similar thing. Either they'd just got shared services, or they hadn't, so they wanted it to set up, or they'd got it but they needed to develop it and evolve existing shared services. So in that respect, I went to work for Mercedes-Benz, BGL Insurance Group, obviously worked for Paperlinks Europe, and of course more latterly working for G4S. Well, I think shared services does vary a great deal from sector to sector and organisation to organisation. In some cases, everything is done in-house, so they will provide all of the services from administration, through to employee relations advice, through to resourcing. In other cases, they'll outsource aspects of it. I've seen pay and reward outsourced, I've seen recruitment, resourcing that's been outsourced to master vendors and so on. So I think there's a whole range of different combinations. Different organisations and sectors have different requirements for shared services. So for example, some of the organisations I've worked in have merely provided HR admin support. In some cases it might be HR advice support. In other organisations, in finance for example, they'll provide pension support, health and safety, recruitment and so on. So I think what really varies is really the extent of shared service provision to their respective businesses. It is involved. Some organisations have gone down the route of having proper service level agreements and key performance indicators where they'll cross-charge their costs back to the business, and other organisations don't actually want to necessarily cross-charge. They're just happy to provide almost like just a centralised HR support service. One of the key categories I would have is communication and engagement. I've come across numerous examples where shared services hasn't really been articulated to the business end users. So the line managers and even the senior managers don't really understand what the shared service provision is. What is the level of service? How does it work? And how should the managers engage with the shared services function? I've also found that often HR communities themselves don't quite understand how the shared services model works, and in many cases still carry on working in personnel, HR or business partner roles, and those roles haven't actually changed at all as a result of shared services. So I think there's a big piece there about communication and engagement. It's often about trying to take businesses with you on that journey of shared services. What are the different roles of the people that need to use the service? So, what is the role of the HR services people? What should they do and how should they do it? How does that therefore impact on the HR advisors or the business partners out in the organisation? And also the role of the line managers. What are they responsible for doing? What forms, paperwork would they need to fill in, to complete in order for that service to be delivered to them? I think the second area is around systems. here again, I think systems is a key enabler for all organisations and particularly shared services. And what I mean by systems is really making sure that if you've got a payroll system or an HR database system, do they actually interact with each other? Do they interface? Is that information shared and communicated? How much of that technology is then used out in the business to provide more tools for line managers to be able to access it and use it? What systems have you got in terms of measuring, the amount of customers that are using your services and how they're using it? So a customer relationship management system. And finally, the third area is an area which I just kind of classify as infrastructure. So they're things all around, have you got standard processes in place that both the shared services people need to use, managers and HR people? Is it standardised so people know what to do and how to do it and when they need to do it? Are the forms, documents that are needed to provide the service sort of standardised? Have you fundamentally got the right roles in the shared services function with the right skills, and have people been trained? So that's quite a big area, but I find that those sort of three sort of key headings, if you like, are really the things that I find most common. What I've designed, I suppose effectively, is a sort of 5-part sort of model or toolkit of how to approach either putting shared services in, or where you've got an existing one, it can be used as an audit tool really to understand if there's any parts of it that are missing. The first part and the most obvious part is really understanding where are you currently as an HR function and in terms of what it is that you really want. So it's surprising actually how many organisations, particularly HR functions, if you ask them, what is the view of their customers in terms of the quality of their service, they won't know exactly. They might have some sound bites where they've had some good feedback, in some cases not so good feedback, but it's nothing more than that. Often it's quite superficial. So part of the tools that I use are very much around doing some sort of a more robust assessment of what is the quality of the service. So it's partly done through structured questioning of often a lot of your line managers and senior managers. It's done through surveys, which I've put together, which is done electronically, which helps you get a very clear and very quick steer of what it is that you're delivering in terms of is it quality or not, and are there any gaps in your current service that your business providers actually want that they're currently not getting. I also look at the capability of the HR team as well. So are they doing the right roles? Have they got the right skills? And also very much around the right sort of attitudinal behaviours that they need, particularly in a shared service environment, which is all about customers, and it's about building those customer relationships and stakeholder relationships. So there's quite a big piece there where I've got tools that almost do this sort of diagnostic, and at the end of that diagnostic, because it's so thorough, you can see very clearly where are those gaps and what's the sort of work that needs to be done. There's 4 other sort of parts to it really, and I won't go into too much detail. And they're not necessarily done sort of a standalone tools. They can be used concurrently, but one is processes and measurements. So it's really very much about, have you got quality assurance systems within HR? How do you measure the quality and ensure that you've got consistent quality and standards of work going out of the department? Have you got defined service level agreements? What are they? Are they easy to understand? Are they easy to follow? And are they easy to track as well? What have you got in terms of your own key performance indicators within HR? So what are you measuring within your own department? One of the key things I also find about shared services is culture and cultural fit. Here again, many organisations are at different points within their evolution and within their sort of customer base, and often just going out and introducing a shared services function may not necessarily be the right way of doing it. It may be something that needs to be piloted originally. It may be something where you have to spend an awful lot of time engaging with your managers to start with. The managers may need to have a lot of training on how to actually do a lot of HR work themselves. I've touched already a bit about systems. Getting these systems right is quite fundamental. Here again, many organisations I've worked in, they've not been able to produce management information reports, or they've not done it in a timely way, or to the requirements of the business. So they're running blind, they're not able to produce information, or they don't have a customer relationship management system that allows them to track effectively, the volume of calls and emails coming into the department and how they're being dealt with, and looking at some of the trends behind, the usage of a shared services function. So there's a big piece around that. And also, it is very much about equipping managers to do more themselves. So the self-service side of a system is important. So employee self-service and management self-service. So how much information and knowledge can you give to the business without them having to ring a shared services? And I suppose finally, and it probably is one of the most important areas, and I've touched on it earlier on, is this whole communication and engagement piece, particularly if you're running multi-site operations, where you've got a lot of people working from remote sites. They may not be aware how to access the shared services. The managers themselves aren't aware what the service is that needs to be provided. So I've been involved very much with looking at marketing shared services, producing posters, pamphlets, campaigns, doing workshops out in the businesses to really engage with the businesses so they fully understand what shared services can offer and how they actually need to work and operate with the shared services function. And this also needs to be extended to the HR community as well. I think because of my sort of background, which is very sort of broad and general, running from having worked in a commercial department to working operationally, worked as a director, strategic planning, strategic management, being a key decision maker around the boardroom table in terms of the direction an organisation needs to take. All the way through to working and managing operation day to day, large groups of teams of people. I think those two things, strategic, being part of a board, being part of a decision making, and being an operations person, really puts me in a really strong position to understand how organisations work and understand very quickly sort of what are the key things that may be missing or could be developed or enhanced. I've worked both internationally and also within the UK. I've worked for German companies, French companies, Australian companies. I've worked abroad, so I understand European culture. I've worked across all of these different countries, so I understand the different cultures, the different ways of working, and how to get the best out of people from these different cultures and get them working as one team to deliver against sort of core projects as well. I guess the other value I've got is I've actually saved an awful lot of money for organisations too. So for example, I've been very much involved in understanding how to deliver a better resourcing service to businesses, and I've saved typically £1 million on budgets by managing preferred supplier lists better, by insourcing, or actually going and outsourcing it to master vendors to reduce the cost base whilst improving the level of service. I've been very much involved in restructuring organisations so that they develop a much better quality of service to their end users and to their customers. So I've driven out costs, worked within the education sector, for example, recently, and saved £1.2 million on their budget by restructuring, by bringing in better quality people, providing a higher level of service, driving out inefficiencies. I've also been very much involved in managing core projects within organisations, so bringing it in-house rather than going out externally, and I've saved £250,000 there in 1 year just by project managing the introduction of a new HR system rather than using an external body to do that. So I have a whole list of organisations and huge savings that I've made to them, in addition to the fact that I've worked in project management and I've worked strategically and operationally.